2024. The ship go by Guam, about 20 kilometers away. It's from the Guam Island. Now is 4 a.m. Ship on 4 a.m. on November 23rd and October 23rd, 2024. Ship go by Guam, and the ship will go around with it, and this was the Guam Island, about 20 kilometers away from the ship.
Well, welcome everybody to our military appreciation gathering. Thank you so much. Now, who is here and ready for the military gathering? Make some noise. That was semi-good. But I'm looking around the room, there's a few of you looking real uncomfortable, looking a bit tense, alright? And I know that the military are not quiet. So let's try that again. Who's ready for the military? Make some noise! Welcome to this event. This is my favourite event to host on the ship. I love this event because this is one of the only events where it means something. This is an event that is important. This is an event that actually has some gravity to it. Everything else that we do on the ship is for nothing, right? It's just for your enjoyment. Other than a group of St. Jude where it actually gives back, right? This is the only other event this cruise that actually means something, right? And I want to say a big thank you for taking the time out of your day. Thank you for coming to this event, right? There's so many things you could be doing, whether it be drinking at a bar or anything of those different things. You come to this event, and I do greatly appreciate that, right? Because you've seen the importance of that, right? I said this at the start of the cruise. You know, when it comes to military, you know, we say thank you a lot. And sometimes when we say thank you, we lose the meaning behind our words. You know, it's like with your partner when you say I love you too many times, right? It becomes a habit. It becomes, you know, habitual. You just say I love you, and then every now and again you really start to think about how much you do love that person. It's the same thing when you thank the military. Sometimes it's a knee-jerk reaction. You know you're supposed to say thank you, so you just say it. And we forget the reasons that we're saying thank you. And this cruise is a perfect example, you know? Sometimes things go wrong. You know? And it's bad when things go wrong, and it sucks when things go wrong, right? And you can have any opinion you want of me as a cruise director or whatever, right? This is my job. I host things. That's all I do, alright? You can blame me for everything else, but that's not my job, alright? Believe it or not, I am not in charge of gangways, food, drinks, and all those different things. This is what I do. This is it, alright? When things go wrong, right? Things go wrong. But isn't it amazing, right? Isn't it amazing that we have the freedom to get upset about the smallest things in life? Because our life could be a lot harder, and our problems could be a lot bigger if it wasn't for the people in this room right now and their sacrifices. So I want to say a big thank you, right? You know, yeah, it sucks that we miss Guam. It sucks. I hate it, right? But isn't it incredible we're on this cruise? People would kill to be on this cruise. How amazing is it that we have the freedom to do that? People would do anything to have those freedoms. And you fought for those freedoms for your country, and I think that's a beautiful thing. So I want to say a massive thank you for coming to this event. It's an event that's very near and dear to my heart, because my dad was in the Navy. Any Navy in the house? Alright. Just out of interest, before we do get started, which branch of the military is the best? Good, I'm glad that's settled. Okay. Now when it comes to this event, who's never been to this event? Just a show of hands. Who's never been? Okay, alright. Now, I do want to set your expectations of what this event is, alright? Firstly, this is not a solemn event, alright? This is not an event where we're going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya, alright? This is an appreciation event. It is a celebration. It's a celebration of all your achievements, a celebration of life. It's going to be Okay, Army. Now, Army, There is a lot of you here, okay? So I expect this to be extra loud, okay? 'Cause right now, wow, there's a lot of home. Now, there's one thing that you may not. There's a man in a robe. God bless you, sir. Looks like you just come out of the institution. Sir.
Oh my God.
Cái gì?
Ông mới vô, nó nói anh chồng ông.
Nói gì?
Ông già đó, nói ông rất ông mới quýnh lớp hay sao?
Where's your wife?
Ông mặc cái áo mà cho bơi bơi. Mặc cái áo mà đi spa.
Did you see some weird things on shit? I think we need to hit line very, very soon. Let me see that. Now, as I was saying,
Thằng này nó dịu.
one thing that you may not know about me, I don't often tell people this, is that I was never part of the military. I was never part of the military, and I always wanted to join the military, but unfortunately, I have a medical condition. I'm a wimp, and I couldn't join the military, but I often get asked, especially during this event, Andy, what branch would you join if you could join any branch of the military? And it often upsets a few people because I have to choose, and the one I always choose, it has to be the army. So doing it in the army, and I have so much time. And right there with you, brothers and sisters. The next one I like is very Marines in the house. Stand up, my Marines. I always look at the Marines because they're the only branch that always turns around to see who else is in the room.
Chữ này là thôi cái chữ đó đó.
What is it
Em
the
Kennedy
Marines say?
nói đó.
I'm not Second verse on you. There's one man in the distance. I saw you, sir. Good man, good man. Now, Marines, give them one more round of applause for the Marines. Now, I don't often like to say this. It's a bit personal. But I was never part of the military. But I often get asked, Andy, if you were to join any branch in the military,
Marine.
what branch would you choose?
Marine.
And there's only one I would ever think about joining. And it has to be the Marines. It's the only one in the house. The only one. The only one I choose. The best one by far, I tell you.
Này nó phải.
Next one, do we have any Navy in the house? I'm in charge of the orchestra down here, alright? So right now, let's see how loud you can sing our Navy here. It goes a little bit like this. It's got a bit of a weird beat, I'll count you in. You can drink. I remember one time I was in North Carolina, North Kakalaka. And I went drinking with a veteran in North Carolina, and he showed me an American delicacy called moonshine. That stuff is good! You do that well, Americans. I went blind for a night. It was fantastic. I woke up married to a man called Barry. It was fantastic. I still got his name tattooed on my butt cheeks. Great guy. We still talk. But thank you to my Navy. And the next one I want to reference is, of course, the Air Force. Air Force. Thank you all, Air Force.
Này gấm hả?
These are the guests that are staying in the suites here on board. Because we always know that Air Force has the best accommodation. He that ever have his way is fire from his eye, whose fear is a fear, but slowly how to fight. We sing our majesty, you serve us know, Coast Guard, I want to say a big thank you, you know, because last night we needed the Coast Guard. Last night we used the Coast Guard. Last night the Coast Guard came and they helped our incredible guests that needed that extra help. It was a massive organisation that we've been trying to do for a few days now. It started off trying to discuss helicopters, and then it was boats, and it was all sorts of different things. But the Coast Guard worked with us, and helped us, and made sure that the guests that needed that extra help got that extra help. So I want to say a big thank you, you know. Just like any service, you know, whether it be a first responder or whether it be any military, you don't realise sometimes how much you need something until the time arises, you know. So I want to say a big thank you. And we realised how much we missed the Coast Guard when we were coming out of the Philippines, you know, and that communication we have with the Coast Guard, the Caribbean, you know, you miss that, you know, when it's gone and things like that. When we were trying to problem solve and things like that, it's not as easy when you're on the other side of the world. So I want to say a big the invisible front line, war fighters brave and true. Standing up night and day, where the Space Force rock on high. Give it the Space Force, everybody! Oh God! A few other groups, a lot of other groups, and a lot of different branches, and lots of different subgroups as well, right? Now, when it comes to this event, you see it done a million times, okay? Also, when it comes to this event, I am not an intelligent man. Thank you for agreeing. Now, when it comes to this event, I try my best to represent every group imaginable. However, I am but one man, okay? And every week I get told new information, and some of the old information leaves my head, all right? If I don't mention in this event a group that is important to you, please don't be upset with me, all right? I have no idea about your individual lives and your individual stories and the things that you hold dear to yourself. Nor do you know what I hold dear, right? If I don't mention a group that is near and dear to your heart, please don't be upset. Later in this event, there is an open forum, okay? Please stand up, get that mic, and represent that group, all right? Tell me about that group that I may have missed, all right? It doesn't mean that I think they're not important. It just means that if I can't name every group, we'll be here until we get to Honolulu, all right? So I can't mention every single thing that's ever happened, okay? That's not possible.
Individual.
Australians in the room. Very nice to all of you. Do we have anyone from any other country? Any Canadians? Alright. Do we have anyone that has served in any other country from around the world? Anyone else that, you know? Yes, sir?
The Bahamas.
The Bahamas are over here. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. You know, and just because, you know, there's many other nationalities in the world that we've worked with, you know, America, you know, the big bully and a habit to disrespect the police, you know, to think you know everything about the law because Susan on Facebook said something, right? And I don't think it's right because the first people you call are the police. If you're in trouble, you call the police. No matter what your opinion, you always call the police. And I want to say a massive thank you to the police for all your sacrifices and everything that you do. I appreciate it. And I also like to mention all of our relief workers. Now, peacekeeping missions, Australia, you do a lot of peacekeeping missions, and those people who worked are, when it comes to firefighters, we have a lot of flash fires in Australia and America, flash floods and things like that. So all our relief workers and people like that, particular conflicts in this particular group of people have really paved the way for how we treat our military today, you know? And it's a lesson, a hard lesson that we shouldn't have had to do in the first place. These people should not have been the guinea pigs of this, and they shouldn't have had to go through this. And I want us to say how much we appreciate these people and give them the biggest round of applause. And I want to say I thank you, we love you, and welcome home to all my Vietnam veterans. Thank you for everything you do, for everything you've done. appreciate each and every single one of you. Thank you all.
Storm Desert.
Storm.
Yes.
Storm Desert.
Now, space diamonds, a lot of you are using this one as well. Desert Shield. Desert Shield.
Very cool.
And this is where things stop getting chronological. I'm going to mention the next one. I want to mention Somalia.
Pakistan.
Right over here, thank you so much. East Timor.
East Timor.
I want to mention Panama. I want to mention Grenada.
Grenada.
And I want to mention Bosnia and Herzegovina. Yugoslavia and Kosovo.
Yugoslavia.
The Falklands.
Falkland Island.
Oh, yeah, yes, sir, right over there. And I want to mention Operation Iraqi Freedom. Operation Enduring Freedom. Operation Inherent Resolve. You just stood for a while over there, sir. Operation Flibbity-Bibbity. Next one I'd like to mention, I'd like to do is a big whole Afghanistan, and Iraq, and a global war on terror. Please stand up for that one.
All right.
And like I said, those are the ones that commonly get mentioned. That is not every conflict, okay? But in the room right now, is there anyone that served in any of the conflicts that I didn't mention right now? Only if you said personally, just mention it. I'd like to open it. Yes,
Iran and Iraq War, summer of 1988.
Iran and Iraq War, sir.
Do I?
There you go, there's some people right there for you. There you go, yes, madam.
It wasn't a conflict, but I was a Vietnam era veteran.
You're Vietnam era veteran, very, very nice. You're like, of course, thank you so much for that. Yeah. Dominican Republic and Cyprus, right over here, right across for that one. Thank you. Any others that I didn't mention? Yes, sir. Beirut, right over here. Anyone else that I didn't mention? Alright. If there's any others, obviously you get. Sorry, my dear, sorry. Gulf War, the Gulf War, yes.
Go, đúng rồi, go war Go to the
Any others that I didn't mention?
Oh.
Anyone wants a part of? Alright, yes, sir. Desert Hope. Wow, I've never heard that. That's a very good. Thank you so much. I've never had that one. Desert Hope. Thank you so much. Thank you for educating me. I appreciate it, sir. Any others that I didn't mention, folks? If you remember any, obviously there's that open forum to mention as well.
My name is Steve Bemis. I'm a Christian chaplain, and I invite you to join me in prayer, if you will. Father God, it is with grateful hearts that we come before you. We are so thankful for each and every veteran that is here today, physical and mental. We thank you for them and for their sacrifice. We remember those who gave not just a period of time for their hopes and dreams, but gave up all of their hopes and dreams and gave up all of their tomorrows, that we can be safe and that we can have freedom. Father, on all of these veterans and those that supported them, we just ask your mercy and grace to flow out upon them, and your greatest blessings to be given to them to every day of their lives. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
How much all of us here at Carnival appreciate you and your military service. I hope you're having a wonderful cruise vacation. We're grateful that you've chosen to attend this special tribute to honor those on board who have served or are currently serving in the military. It's always one of my favorite things to do when I'm on a Carnival cruise, and it's a guest favorite as well. We're privileged here at Carnival to have more active and retired military service members choosing to sail with us over any other cruise line for their much-deserved vacation. I have personally witnessed the honor.
A moment to offer a heartfelt thank you for what my dear friend Christine Duffy and the entire Carnival Cruise Line team have done and continue to do to help us care for our military families. We know Carnival Cruise Line enthusiastically supports our important work and champions our vision to be the provider of choice for short-term financial relief and recurring family support programs to ensure the long-term resiliency of our amazing military families. We also know Carnival Cruise Line shares our belief that strong military families make their communities stronger.
For a whole year. So please check your tatas and be well.
Or if you need help, there's plenty of men in the room that will give you
Hi, my name is Mary. My husband served in the service, but I'm here to talk about what my daughter is doing with Quilts of Battle. It is a 100% volunteer program for people design and make these quilts. My daughter donates her long-arm quilting services, and they wrap a veteran with one of these quilts. They are all over the place. They're all over Facebook. The veteran has to be recommended, and you will need the DD-214, but it is a wonderful service, okay? On top of that, in Texas, Heroes Ranch, look into that, find out if your veteran can qualify and go stay there. They do wonderful things. They also host Quilt of Battle wrapping. Thank you.
You have a gift for me. Woo! Oh, sweetheart.
Cái gì? Có gì vậy? Gì không?
Gift cho cái thằng
Thank
này
you so
nha.
much. Yeah, he's fancy enough, I'll tell you. Thank you so much, sweetheart. Thank you. Woo! $30. Everyone does that. Thank you so much, sweetheart. I appreciate that a lot. That's beautiful. Thank you. I'll put it over with you. Sorry, Sean, next one.
All right. First thing I want to do is thank this young lady because on a previous cruise she told me to sign up for my veterans benefits, and 2 months later I actually needed them. Now, the other reason why I always stand up, I want to honor the name of a gentleman that I didn't know. He was a Medal of Honor winner. There's a National SOS and the retirees.
I would like to give it to the oldest by age, the oldest veteran here in the audience. Do we have any veteran over the age of 80? Got 2. 3. Has a list by tail numbers and manifest of who flew on which aircraft. Please go down to the VA, get your name in that computer, get registered, because in 5 or 10 years from now you come up with symptoms from Vietnam, Agent Orange. You never served there, but you were on the planes that transported you that were never decontaminated. So please, get in that computer. Work through the VA. I want to thank you all for hearing me out. Thank Carnival. Again, please get tested for cancer. I know it's not something you want to talk about, but get tested. And God bless each and every one of you in our great country of ours. Thank you, Andy.
Good morning, everyone. My background is I spent 21 years as a Navy brat, 9 years as a Navy wife, and 21 years as a military mom. My dad served in Korea, he served in Vietnam. My son served in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Thanks to those who are next to us. I apologize. We were practicing so we could share this song with you today.
Đây là con của ông này.
She's and peace and war, you pay the price for the cause you hold so dear. That we may wake each morning bright and know that freedom reigns because of your great sacrifice. Our country joins to sing. Thank you, oh thank you, men and women, brave and strong. To those who serve so gallantly, we sing this grateful song. Thank you, oh thank you, men and women, brave and strong. To those who serve so gallantly, we sing this grateful song.
Here, I've got a great show for you today. It's going to be on Captain Cook. I need to know how many people I have from Australia in the audience. I've got a couple here, a few back there, a few back there. Okay, good. Yes, I am going to talk about Joseph Banks. Do you know who he is? If you're from Hawaii? Or from Australia? Banks? Okay. Well, I guess we're all going to learn about Banks. Okay. We're going to learn about him. He was a naturalist with Cook. Let's get going here. And today's show is on Cook. Now, wait a second. Just kidding. I just had to do that. All right, folks, here we go. That's my one joke. I told you I needed to have something when I got up on the stage. You're exactly right. All right, Captain Cook, he was the most significant explorer of the 18th century, and that means during the 1700s. I call him the Neil Armstrong of Europe because he explored this ocean that we're in more thoroughly than anyone had ever explored it before. Remember, Magellan was the first European to really to enter the Pacific Ocean, and then we had a few explorers that were coming in and out, but nobody explored the Pacific Ocean. This was Captain Cook's moon. And I thought I would throw this in just real quick, just a slight deviation for this dateline change. And we talked about this a little bit with Andy this morning in the morning show. But this is what happens here. We're sitting right here, and this is a man-made line, and this designates between 2 days. So we're traveling kind of in this area. We're going to pass the international date line, but you look at all those jags that it makes, and that's because there are different island groups. You have the Society Islands, Marshall Islands, Cook Islands, all these islands, and if we were to just draw a straight line, those island groups, which are considered kind of nation-like groups, would have to be in different time zones. And that's why we jog this around like that. And this is on the other side of the world, UTC. This is the prime meridian here, and this goes straight through Greenwich. And on the other side, we have this date line. From UTC, we will either subtract an hour in time. You can think of, if it's, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but if you think that's like 6 p.m., then anybody who's in this next is going to be -1 from 6, which would be 5 p.m., and then -2 would be 4, 3, 2, 1, And then right here, we'd be back at noon, and then we're gonna go through that whole thing, and then we'll do that. And then we'll do the day change, and then it'll be 6 p.m. the next day, and that's how that time zone works. And why we're going through these different time zones for that. And then you start, and then you're the day after, and if you keep going around, then it's another day and another day. So if you're going the right way, you're going to get younger. And that's why all the astronauts, you ever look at those astronauts? That's why they look young. They do it every 30 minutes or 90 minutes. They're going around. That's not true. They're young just because they are young. All right, here we go. Captain Cook, he began as a merchant marine apprentice, and he learned all of his navigation and surveying, astronomy skills here. And then finally, he's moving up through the merchant marines. He's all ready to become a captain, and then he quits. And he joins the Royal Navy. And he starts all over again at the very bottom. But this is what he wanted to do. And Cook had some special skills. He became an accomplished surveyor and map maker. And he became famous within the Navy because his maps of this area right up here, the St. Lawrence Waterway, were instrumental in the British beating the French in the French 7-Year War, also known as the American Indian War as well, or the French Indian War as well during this particular time. And if you look at the date on that, it's interesting because that was in 1776. Or 1767. And 9 years later, what's going to happen? We're going to have the Revolutionary War in America. And who comes to our aid? France. And a big reason why France came to help us was it was to jab that dagger into the British. Because they beat them 9 years earlier, and they said, you know what, we're going to go with the Americans on this. And that's one of the reasons why the French came to our rescue. So at age 39, Cook is appointed as captain. His special, unique skills, which were unparalleled by anyone else in the Royal Navy, were recognized, and he became a captain. Now, unlike other explorers, his voyages were not driven by this, he personally was not driven by these conquests for land or to convert the inhabitants of all of these lands that he would explore to the religion of the Christian religion. He was driven by a pure intellectual curiosity, passion for discovery, and this pursuit of perfection. Cook was a perfectionist. Probably had ADHD. He was just driven and by this perfection. And he was a very adventurous individual. And I quoted him here. I said, I intend to go not only farther than any man has ever gone, but as far as I think it is possible for a man to go. And this philosophy drove him during these 11 years and these 3 voyages that we're going to look at here. Well, during this time, there's an institution known as the Royal Society. And this was started 100 years before. And you can see some of the names of the individuals that belong to this Royal Society. They had all of the most brilliant people during this period of time, the 1700s, that were available to science. Newton, Einstein, Darwin, Alan Turing, later on in the 1900s, who invented the computer. Stephen Hawking, we all know him. All of these individuals belong to the Royal Society. Cook did not, but he was recognized for his skills in exploration by the society. And the society had, they had a saying, they said, take nobody's word for it. And that is what drove them. All of these individuals, it was, we're not going to just believe somebody just because they're telling us this, but we want proof. And this was kind of the beginning of that whole scientific process when we think of it. Well, they recognized Cook, and they decide they're going to send him out on a mission. And on this mission, he's got two goals. One of the goals is to determine the distance of the Earth to the sun. And this is something that the society had been working on, and they wanted to really, really nail that down. And then there was a second goal. And this goal was the Royal Society believed that there was a giant landmass in the southern hemisphere. They called it Australia's Incognita. And they wanted someone to go down and figure out if that place actually existed. And they've assigned this mission to Cook. So he's got two goals for this. And this is a little map. You can see it. Can you see that on the side screens? Good. Yeah. This is this landmass, Australia's Incognita. And take a look at the size of it. They believed that the only way the Earth could continue to revolve around the sun and then do its revolutions around the sun and then continue to spin on its axis without falling off of its axis, it had to be in balance. And the only way it could be in balance is if the same amount of land in the northern hemisphere existed in the southern hemisphere. That was number one from a scientific viewpoint, but the other part was from a commercial viewpoint. And that was this. They believed that not only did this land exist, but they believed that there were millions of people on it, inhabiting it, just like in North America. And England wanted to be the country to find it. Because remember, these countries, you've got these four major powers. You've got France, you've got England, you've got Portugal, and you've got Spain. They're all competing right now. And England wants to be the one to find it. They're going to open up a brand new trade route, and there you go, money. This is the ship that they gave Cook. It's called the Endeavour. It had 4 floors on it. It was a bark, and barks are flat-bottom boats. It didn't have a keel like we have, but this was a flat-bottom boat. And I thought I'd do some comparisons here. There's the Carnival. You know, our typical Carnival ship. Of course, ships are bigger and smaller, but basically all of our ships are the same, pretty much the same length, and they're all pretty much the same. They have the same beam, which is the distance from one side to the other. The only way they're different is we stack up floors on top of these ships. So that gives you an idea. Traveled about 7 to 8 knots. Endeavour had 94 people. It had sailors, it had some guards, Marines. It also had a few civilians. Had some bow guns, cannons on it, and provisions, 18 months of provision. They carried all of this on this boat or ship that was 100 feet long. Carnival, on the other hand, we've got 3,000 people. We don't have any cannons on our ship. And that's what a week of provisions looks like. For us, 25,000 pounds of meat, eggs, gallons. We have 12,000 cans of beer out. At least we did when we left. So obviously this is going to change. But look at all that. They had 10,000 gallons of beer on the Endeavour, 20,000 pounds of sauerkraut. My gosh. Goats, sheep, hogs. They had all these animals on this ship. Here were the rations, typical rations for a sailor. Each sailor had a pound of meat, couple cups of peas, oats, butter, cheese, and they each got a ration of a gallon of beer or rum per week. Yeah, per week, not per day. Yes. And I put this in just to give you an idea, because I got to thinking about this. How are you going to convince 100 guys to get on this boat and they're going to sail into the unknown, this area that he was going to explore? Nobody had looked at this area. Sure, people had sailed around the earth, people had visited different islands and so forth, but nobody had done what Cook was about to do. And I'm thinking, okay, how are you going to get these guys to do this? So here's your recruitment speech. I've been asked to find volunteers for a scientific journey. The good news is we may go down in history. The bad news is we're going to have a few obstacles. First, 50% of the sailors statistically don't return from this journey. That means 1 in 2. They die from different diseases. The most common disease that sailors would die from was scurvy. Yeah. And during these 2 centuries of sailing, there were 5 million sailors that died of scurvy. And it was acceptable to lose half of your crew to scurvy during a three or four year journey. But don't worry about that, we're gonna eat some lemons. Second, we have to load 100,000 pounds of supply, not including goat, sheep, hogs, geese, chickens. Don't worry about the smell though, because the 20,000 pounds of sauerkraut will take care of that. Third, there's not gonna be a lot of room for sleeping either. But don't worry about that, because we've got a flat bottom boat and the 30-foot waves, cockroaches, rats won't let you sleep anyway. And fourth, we're not really sure where we're going or how long we're going to be gone for. So give your wife and your kids an extra hug, because you don't know if you're coming back. The cockroaches on these ships, they would tie up to an island, and the rat infestation on these ships was so bad, they would take everything out of the ship when they would come to an island, and they would smoke the whole ship trying to get them. The ship was almost alive, felt like it was alive with these intruders or invaders. So who's with me on that? Anybody ready to sign up? I don't think so. If we looked at the Endeavor and compared it to our ship, that's what it would look like. It's about the length of 3 of our lifeboats. And they're going for 3 or 4 years, not very big. He had scientists and artists on with him as well. And the crew, just like our crew, they had additional duties. There were carpenters, sail makers, armorers, butchers, cooks, assistants, servants to the officers as well. He had a few civilians, he had some naturalists, and he also had an astronomer and a couple of artists as well. This individual here is Sir Joseph Banks. He was the naturalist on Cook's very first voyage, and he will play a role throughout this story. He was the father of Australia. He used his wealth. He was a very wealthy individual, and he used his wealth for scientific exploration. President of the Royal Society, longest reigning president, still holds that record. And he was the key authority on all matters when it came to Australia. Because he was with Cook on that very first voyage, he was the one, when he came back to England, he said, we need to send people to this great land of Australia. And sure enough, they did. And he was the one who was instrumental in that. His face is also on a $5 bill. It was on that from, I think it was 1967 to 1992 or 3, somewhere in there. And that is Joseph Banks, and he's considered the father of Australia. Here are some of the paintings that came from these 2 artists. We had Sidney Parkinson, Alexander Buchan, and these are some of the very first renderings that came from this land of Polynesia. Those 2 pictures you see in the upper left and down lower are the very first drawings of tattoos. Tattoos were unknown in Europe during this time. These are Maoris. That is the very first drawing of a kangaroo. Kangaroo were unknown as well. Some of the plants, Banks brought back 1,000 plant samples that no one in Europe had ever seen before as well. Cook also had instructions for his crew that were unlike other captains of other exploration vessels. He said, when you encounter the indigenous people or the native people, he said, have patience, forbearance, respect their lands, treat them with humanity, and cultivate friendship. These were his rules. Be on guard, make presents, invite to trade. Take possession of land with the consent of the people. Now, it didn't always work that way. But these were his values. He was raised a Quaker, and he carried those values with him as he explored. No crew members ever reported him drinking. He was never cavorting with the women of the islands either, which they kind of made fun of him for, actually. But in any case, those were kind of his values. And in the end, they served him well because it created a loyal crew for him, a loyal following. His expeditions, he had 3 of them. On his second and his third, 80% of the crew signed up again with him that were living as well. And most of his crew came back living. If he did lose a crew member, it was either in an encounter with natives, which really only happened, there was only one serious event where that took place, And then the other was malaria, because they would come back through Jakarta sometimes, and they would encounter that. Here's his first voyage. He's going to sail west. Now, he's not going to sail west each time, but on his very first one, and on this trip he only has one ship. On the other two, he's going to have 2 ships. All right. He leaves Plymouth. He goes to the Madeira Islands, and here he's going to replenish his supplies. He's going to head over to Rio, and here, once again, he's going to replenish his supplies. He rounds the Horn, and he finally arrives in Tahiti, because remember, his first goal is what? It's to map the crossing of Venus. He's going to try to help the Royal Society figure out how old the Earth is. And I tried to put in as many original drawings and paintings as I could, and these are the very first ones. Most of these images that you're going to see are the very first ones. So this is the very first image to come back of Tahiti. They're in a place called Montevilla Bay. And the goal, once again, is to record the movement of Venus across the sun. We call that the transect of Venus. And he's going to collect that data. Once again, it's going to help the Royal Society figure out the distance of the Earth to the sun. They set up this little observation observatory, and they're going to sit here for weeks. And the astronomer is going to be working in here, and that is the original drawing. The top one is from Cook, and then the bottom one is the astronomer. And I think Cook's aren't quite in the same order, but that is what they both observed. And that information helped us make the first accurate determination of the distance of the Earth to the sun. And they were literally within, it's 92 million, basically 92 million miles, and their observations were off by about 700,000 miles, which isn't very much when you think about it. He gets done with that. What's his second mission? He's going to see if there's an Australia's incognita, where he's going to look for this giant southern continent. So he takes off, and he's going to start traveling through these islands. He travels through what he named, Cook named these, the Society Islands. The reason he did that was because these island groups, as he encountered the different inhabitants of the islands, they seemed to have a very common culture. They had a common language, and they knew each other, did a lot of trade. And he said, oh, well, all these islands, we can group them together and call them a society. He headed over to the Cook Islands. Those were named for him. He didn't name anything that he discovered after himself. He was always naming it after benefactors or in relationship to some event that had taken place. All the different landmarks that bear Cook's name were put there by somebody else. They weren't put there by Cook. So he goes to the Cook Islands, and he's traveling around meeting these individuals. His artists are making the very first drawings of the chiefs, the priests, these different voyaging canoes that are out there, and he's exploring that whole area. Well, before he left Tahiti, I have to mention this individual. His name is Tupaia. And Tupaia played a critical role during Cook's first voyage because he was a Polynesian, and they were able to communicate with Tupaia. And Joseph Banks met Tupaia while they were in Tahiti, and he said, I think I want to bring him with us, and I think we're going to bring him back to England. And that was the plan. This was Banks' plan. Cook was so-so on it, not too interested in it. But Tupaia was instrumental because that allowed Cook to visit these different islands, not just the Cook and the Society Islands, but also further out, other islands as well. Even all the way to New Zealand, the language was common enough that Tupaia could communicate on some level with the Maori as well. And the other thing, and this is what really amazed Cook, was Tupaia could always point to home. It didn't matter how many thousands of miles away. Where's home right now? Tupaia always knew where home was. Where's your home off the ship? Exactly. He could always point. He always knew where it was. And this absolutely fascinated Cook. Unfortunately, Tupaia didn't make it all the way. They were coming, they finished with New Zealand, they'd come up the east coast of Australia, they were in Jakarta, wasn't called Jakarta at the time, and he caught malaria and he never made it back to Banks' dismay. But before he died, he drew a map, and Cook challenged him to do this. And this is a copy of the map. It's preserved in a museum in England, in Greenwich, and this is the map that he drew of all the islands. Nobody could understand it. In tomorrow's talk, we're going to talk about this map a little bit, because it turns out it wasn't until the 1970s that another historian began looking at this map and looking at it from a different way, from the way Polynesians navigated, because they didn't navigate the same way we navigate. And they looked at it from that perspective, and it turns out that this map is very accurate when you see it the way the Polynesians saw it. But he knew the location of all of these islands, and we're going to talk tomorrow about how he knew that. In the meantime, though, Cook was the first European to recognize that islanders shared a common ancestry, and they were skilled at long-distance sailing. And even though by the time Cook comes around, we're doing these long-distance sails, it was Magellan who was the first one to really do it. That was in the early 1500s, right? The Polynesians began sailing beyond the horizon 5,000 years before that. They knew that the earth was round, and they knew that all of this. Well, the great southern continent, this is Terra Australis. They're searching, and what does he come up with? Nothing. Empty-handed. Cook is for sure convinced, after all of his sailing here, that there is no Terra Australis. So, his first voyage, he decides to go home. He searched that South Pacific, and on his way home, he's headed for Tasmania, which is a little bit south, but he ends up in New Zealand. And while he's there, because Cook is a map maker, and what do map makers do? They map. And that's exactly what he did. And those are the very first ever maps of New Zealand. And he maps this out so accurately that his maps, his charts, are used for over 100 years after. No one is able to map that better than what Cook did. He maps North, South Island, realizes those two are not connected. First one to realize that. Some of the very first drawings ever of Maori. Look at those sails on that and the size of those canoes. Massive voyaging canoes that can hold over 100 people. Once again, those are the first two drawings of tattoos. Pretty amazing. And then instead of heading south of Australia, he decides he's going to hit the East Coast. And Cook produces the very first map of the East Coast of Australia. And he goes all the way up the coast, mapping every nook and cranny. Starts there, makes landfall at a place called Botany Bay down at the south. He's the first European to hit the Great Barrier Reef here as well. That's the Endeavour River. And his ship, of course, was named the Endeavour. That particular landmark in that river are named after him, because this is where he hit the Barrier Reef and came within literally a few hours of losing the entire mission and losing his whole crew. And they just dumped off ballast, they dumped off anchors, they dumped off all kinds, anything that had weight to it so that they could get up off that reef at high tide. And he was lucky enough to be able to float it, continue his journey. Here are his accomplishments on his very first voyage. He's able to provide this crucial information for this transect of Venus. And by the way, this transect only occurs once every 230 so years. It actually occurs twice during that period of time. And there's a separation of about 6 years between those two, but they would have had to have waited another 250 years basically to get that calculation again. So that was a critical piece. Disproved the existence of the great southern continent, first contact with New Zealand and the Maoris. Now, he wasn't the first European to have seen them, but he was the first person to land there. Tasman was the very first 125 years earlier, but Tasman never landed, and he just did a little bit of trading. He knew they were there, so Cook was the first one to have a significant encounter with them. He mapped New Zealand, Southeast Australia, and he was the first person to begin to think that these Polynesians were capable of doing this long distance voyaging. Now he has a second voyage. He comes home. Royal Society is pretty happy. They're going, okay, this guy knows what he's doing, for sure. And they immediately assign him a second voyage because the society wants him to thoroughly check. They're thinking there might be a few places that you missed with this. And Cook knows there's no southern continent, but he agrees to do it because it's in his blood, and they're going to pay for this. So let's go out. Let's go do it again. They still believe this. In this case, though, Cook is going to sail east instead of west. This is the Resolution and the Adventure that are located in Portsmouth. That's what his ship looked like. That was an actual drawing. Here's another rendering of that with a little bit of coloration. These are pretty good sized ships, and you can see how they're flat bottom there. He's going to go once again, second voyage. Find this missing continent. He leaves Plymouth. He's going to go once again to the Madeira Islands, and now he's going to go by the Cape of Good Hope, here at the tip of South America, here. And this was a favorite landing spot for mariners. What was that? South Africa. Not South America, no. This, and they get a little bit, you've got the Tierra del Fuego down there in South America, but the Cape of Good Hope, yeah, thank you. This is Africa. And this was run by the Dutch. And the Dutch had established this as a port, and they had just ballooned this. This was a place that mariners loved to go. It was so remote, they'd been sailing for weeks and months at a time. And they would come here, and this is where they would replenish their supplies. So he stops there, and then he crosses Antarctica. And he is the first person to cross the South Antarctic Circle. No one has done this before. And this is the route that he took. And you can see it on that green line. So he's coming out here from South Africa. This was an area that he had not explored before. And he is going to zigzag all the way around. And as we'll find out, he's probably the first person to have ever seen the continent of Antarctica. And he's going to explore that whole southern sea through these predicted areas. And this is, of course, what he encounters. He encounters what he called ice islands, those massive icebergs that are sitting down there. There was fog that was so thick, and remember, we've got two ships that are here. He's got the Resolution and the Adventure, right? And they're trying to keep track of each other. They can't, because the fog is so thick, they can see maybe 20 or 30 feet off the ship, and it's not just thick for one day. It's thick for weeks. They would have to fire cannons. They would have to ring bells, trying to keep track of each other. And the other thing that they're trying to do is they're trying to not run into an ice island. And they're doing this for weeks. And he's making this journey all around Antarctica. Not an easy feat. I don't even see how it's possible. The Discovery, the Adventure, they continue exploring, but both ships become separated. The Adventure throws in the towel, heads up to New Zealand, has a negative encounter with the Maori, and discovered that they like to eat people too, and then they skedaddle out of there and they head back to England. But Cook, of course, what's one of his qualities or characteristics? Persistence. So he says, okay, they tried to meet, they just missed each other by a day or two in New Zealand. He says, we're not going to give up. Let's keep going. And that's exactly what he does. Heads over to Dusky Bay, New Zealand, and he says, we're going to return to the islands. Ends up in another island group, the New Hebrides, up in Polynesia, Society Islands, returns back here, exploring, discovering new islands along the way. Ends up in Tonga, the Marquesans, explores that whole area again, and finally ends up back at this spot, this Tahiti, which is the place that he's going to return to on each one of his voyages here. So he returns home, also goes to Easter Island, Rapa Nui, and one of the most isolated islands in the world. Ends up in Christmas Sound around Christmas, discovers South Georgia, this island off of Antarctica again, and then returns home finally to Plymouth. He said, I had now made the circuit of the Southern Ocean in a high latitude and traversed it in such a manner as to leave not the least room for the possibility of there being a continent unless near the pole and out of reach of navigation. In another part of that journal, also he said, I highly suspect that there is a landmass at the South Pole. He was the first person to speculate this. And he said the reason being because of all the ice that was coming off of this. He said this is ice that was coming off of a landmass down there. And most likely he saw it through the fog. Now, a couple things on this journey that we're going to mention. Remember Tupaya from voyage number 1. Well, they find another Polynesian this time, and his name is Mai. Mai insists on coming back with them. And Cook is thinking, okay, well, let's bring Mai. Let's go ahead and bring Mai. Okay. So they end up bringing Mai back, and he is hosted by Joseph Banks. And remember, Banks wanted to bring Tupaya. Now he's got Mai, and Mai's going to stay there for 2 years because when Cook returns from the second voyage, the Royal Navy retires him, and they send him to Greenwich, and they house him there. They give him a nice house, they give him a nice pension, and this is where he's going to stay. Mai, in the meantime, though, is living this celebrity life in England, and we'll come back to Mai on the third voyage because he's going to play an instrumental role. The second part to this voyage, Cook was carrying this watch. It's called a K1. It's a Larkham Kendall K1 watch. So here was what was going on. For decades, everyone, French, Portuguese, everyone is trying to figure out how to calculate longitude, but there's only one way to do it. You have to know what time it is back home. This was England, this was London, this is why Greenwich is in London. It's because that's where time started for Cook's voyage on this. This is why the prime meridian is located there, because of this watch. So he leaves. His job, or somebody's job on board, is to keep that watch wound, because you have to wind it. But to get to this watch, to have created this watch, took 20 years of ingenuity. And it's this Larkham Kendall is the one who created it, the K1. And Cook is going to test this. And he is going to use that clock, that watch, to do calculations. And so here's the deal with those time zones that we looked at. The reason we have those time zones, did anybody see the morning show? Yeah, we were talking a little bit about this, is because at 12 noon, the sun is directly overhead. And so if you go one time zone over, when the sun is directly overhead, you're going to take out your watch and look at it. In Greenwich, at 12 noon, the sun is directly overhead. But if you're in the next time zone over, and you look at the L1, or the K1 watch here, you will see that your clock is going to show 11 o'clock, and not 12 o'clock when the sun is directly overhead. And without getting into all the details of it, that's kind of how this worked. And this is how Cook was able to calculate and accurately calculate longitude. And by the time he got back, after 3.5 years, that clock was only off by 2 minutes. That's how accurate this was. And it was less than, all of Cook's calculations on that were off by less than 1/3 of a degree. That's how accurate his maps were there. And if I can skip
James
this,
Cook's maps of the land.
I think I'm going to skip that because I kind of gave you that whole story there with her, and I don't want to run out of time here. And then the third point here is scurvy and disease. Cook never lost a man to scurvy. 2 million sailors died from 1600 to 1800. 50%, we already said 50% crew mortality rate. And the doctor who was figuring this out with scurvy was a guy by the name of James Lind. 1950, he came up with this concoction that seemed to work. And Cook believed him. So Cook would carry these carrot marmalade, fruits, oranges. He would carry these fruits because he believed this guy. And sure enough, he was true. Nobody knew about vitamin C, but they just knew there was something in these foods that would keep these men from getting scurvy. Never lost a man to scurvy, which was remarkable. Also, for some reason, Cook realized that skimming fat from their copper pans wasn't a good thing to do, and he never did it. And it turns out that copper will interfere with the absorption of certain nutrients in our intestines, and that also created problems for the crew. So Cook never used that, and he believed the germ theory, and he always tried to keep his ships as clean as he possibly could. Not an easy feat. All right, here's his third voyage. Now, on this voyage, he's got 2 ships. He's going to take the Resolution for the second time, and he's going to take a new consort ship, the Discovery, with him as well. And he's going to sail east. He's got 2 objectives. One, remember Mai? He's going to return Mai back to Tahiti. And then the second is his mission is to find the Northwest Passage. And the Northwest Passage is something that every 20 or 30 years, one of those countries, Portugal, Spain, France, England, they send somebody out to find this. Because if they can find it, it saves months of travel. And they will own a quick, almost like a freeway to Asia. And here's what they do. So Cook's been retired for a while. And this fellow, Lord Barrington, he persuades the Royal Society to send somebody up to look for this again. Here. Lord Sandwich, this is where the term sandwich came from, right? From this guy. And the reason they called it a sandwich was because this guy would not sit to eat. And he was always on the move. So he'd grab a piece of meat, put it between 2 pieces of bread, and eat it. And that's where our sandwich originated, from this guy. First Lord of the Admiralty arranges a meeting to entice Cook into a 3rd voyage. And Cook doesn't even know. They invite him over to dinner. They're telling him about this, this whole adventure. They've already got another captain clerk who's going to be doing the voyage, and Cook gets wrapped up into it. You can just see it happening. And the next thing you know, Cook says, "I'm going to do it." And Cook is an old man now. He's 50 years old. That's old, considering everything he's been through. Royal Society wants him to lead the boldest expedition ever. And not only that, there's a 20,000 pound, which is over $1 million reward for anyone who can find this. And that'll get divided up by the crew as well. So secret mission, the definitive search for the Northwest Passage. England wants a true mission kept a secret, though, from their rivals. And to do that, they're going to use Mai. Mai doesn't even know they're doing this. But they're going to use Mai as the excuse, and they're going to tell the whole world that Cook is going just to return Mai and then do whatever Cook does. His little explorations. Banks isn't on this voyage. Banks wasn't on the second one. Cook didn't let Banks come back after the first one because Banks wanted to have a cabin on the ship bigger than Cook's. And Cook said, "No, that's not going to happen." So Cook accepts this commission. Charles Clerk, he was the guy that was going to captain the Resolution, and he gets bumped down to the Discovery. The ships are retrofitted, but what is about to happen during this whole retrofitting is the American Revolutionary War. And you've got hundreds of ships that are in the shipyards in England, right? They're being fitted to go do battle with the Americans. And then you've got Cook's little ships. So what happens? His ships don't get retrofitted the way they should. They're leaking sieves, he finds out later. And he's not paying attention because he's writing his memoir. This ends up becoming a big problem for him and ultimately leads to his tragic end. So these ships are constantly leaking. He's going to be up in the Arctic, and these ships are not ready for that. He's got 100 men. He had 6 Americans on that ship with him. Also, you've heard of Captain Bligh from Mutiny on the Bounty. Captain Bligh is there. Bligh was with him on his 2nd voyage and on his 3rd voyage. And Bligh was an apprentice of Captain Cook on both of those ships. He was also the master of the ship, which is like the staff captain. And he also had another fellow named George Vancouver, who would later on, 18 years later after this voyage, would end up becoming famous on the West Coast, Vancouver Island, all of those places. He mapped that, and Vancouver learned all of his mapping skills from Captain Cook. In the meantime, he's been a sensation in England. Unknown to the English, though, is not Tupaia. Tupaia was a revered chief, a master navigator. Is just a commoner. And in his mind, he's doing all of this because he wants to take revenge on the Bora Borans. Because they had come when he was a young boy, had come and slaughtered his family and taken all of his land and pushed him off, made him an orphan. But King George, whom he has met, has another plan. And he wants to use to bring all of his treasures and show how advanced England is and the power of England and the richness of England, because he wants to spread England into Polynesia. And he gives all of these little gifts. They load this on Cook's ship. He gives them swords, muskets, gunpowder, clothing, satin, silks. Mai's going to take all this to Tahiti. The Tahitians haven't seen any of this ever. He's got a jack-in-the-box. He's got an electric machine that gives you a shock. Tin soldiers, compass. He's got a Punch and Judy. He's got a puppet show that he's bringing back with him. Telescopes, saddles. He's even got a horse that he's bringing back. Wine, kitchen, portraits, paintings, things that none of the Polynesians have ever seen. And King George loads Mai up with all of these, gives it to Cook, and they take off. In addition to all that, they're carrying all of this stuff: goats, pigs, poultry, waistcoats, 440 shirts, all of this, 700 pairs of trousers, stockings, all of this stuff is loaded onto a ship. These guys didn't travel light. Here's what he does. He leaves Plymouth, once again down to Cape Town, ends up in Tasmania, visits there as well. Tasmania hadn't been visited for 120 years. Heads back to New Zealand again, checks to see what happened, because he didn't know what the true story was of what had happened on the adventure when they landed. Checked to see what happened to those men. Ends up at Cook Island, ends up back in Tahiti again, of course. And this is where he's going to drop Mai off. And now Mai, sometimes it's written Oh Mai, but for the most part it's Mai. Tahiti, Mai, he finds out he's only a commoner. He's bringing back all of this stuff. There's jealousy. The chiefs are going, why should you have all this stuff? And it's just really unsettling. And the chief wants Mai, Cook wants Mai to marry the chief's daughter. Mai isn't interested. They look at another island, Moorea, no good. And they finally end up at this little island. Huahine is how you pronounce that. Huahine, just close to Tahiti, and Mai ends up there. Now, Cook has a second problem as well. Cook has changed, and nobody really knows why. But the first and second voyage, Cook is pretty good around the islanders. But on this third voyage, he is losing his temper, and nobody knows why. His punishments to the crew, they're very disciplined. They were always disciplined. But it seems to be more severe. His punishment for the islanders seems to be more severe. And he has absolutely no tolerance for theft. It's like, because the islanders would come in and they would see nails in the ship, and they didn't have iron. They didn't have things made out of metal. Their things were made out of the natural materials of the island, not this. And they would take things, and they were constantly battling this. And they had been on the first and second voyages as well. But for some reason, Cook just has no tolerance for this. And even on Moorea, there was a goat that was stolen. And he flew into a rage, and he destroyed their boats on the island of Moorea, and he just went through. And nobody understood it, but the crew remarked that this is not the same Captain Cook. So something about Cook had changed. Could have been a medical ailment, and it could have just been, he could have just been older. So we don't know, we still don't know exactly why. Just as a side note, Mai does what he said he was going to do. He takes all those weapons, he attacks the Bora Boras, he wins that battle, he comes back, Captain Bligh lands on that famous voyage. I think there are several movies about Bligh and the Mutiny on the Bounty. One of his stops was here in Tahiti. He tried to see, because he'd been on that third voyage to drop off Mai, he tried to see what had happened to Mai, and there was no record of him. Mai had just literally vanished. Well, Cook is in Tahiti, and now he's got to get on with his mission. So he's in Tahiti, and he does something no one has ever done before, and that is he travels north, which is kind of what we're doing, not from Tahiti, but he travels north. No one had ever done that before. Portuguese had always traveled. We had those galleons, those Spanish galleons with all that gold, but they always went south to Manila, which is one of our ports, and when they came back to the U.S., because of the winds and the currents, they always traveled north, and they would hit the northern coast of California. And then they would sail all the way down that coast, following that Humboldt current, and then they would land in Acapulco. And that was how they did, always a triangle. No one had ever done this before. And lo and behold, what happens? Cook hits islands that no one has ever seen before. And he names them the Sandwich Islands after Lord Sandwich. They eventually become named the Hawaiian Islands. He lands on a place, Waimea Bay on Kauai. People are friendly, happy. They want to trade for nails, of course. They've never seen metal before. If you ever go to Kauai, you can see that place right where he landed. That's what it looks like. There's a little monument there. And then there's a little rock out there that shows exactly where they stepped off in Waimea Bay. And Cook is stunned. He said, how can we account for people having traveled? Because most of those islands are kind of connected, but these are so far out there. And he noticed even that the Hawaiians share a common culture here. And how could they spread? And he thinks back about Tupaia, and he's starting to make these connections. He leaves Kauai, and now he's going to head to the Pacific Northwest, because this is his mission. Kauai's down there. He's going to leave, and he hits the North American coast at a place called Cape Foulweather, because the weather was so terrible. He gets driven down south. He ends up at Nootka Sound, and this is on Vancouver Island, about right in the middle of it on the Pacific Coast side. And he encounters these people that are Drawings, and they are friendly as well. And he's able to trade with these individuals. From Nootka Sound, he heads up north to Prince William Sound, and he's mapping this entire coast. Now, when Cook was on Vancouver Island and he headed up north, he didn't go into the inside passageway. If you've done the Alaska cruise, you pass through that. He didn't do that, but he said out loud, somebody needs to come back and go explore all these islands. There are 1,100 islands in the inside passageway. And who was with him during this? Captain Vancouver. 18 years later, what did Vancouver do? He came and mapped the entire inside passageway. That's why he did it. He heads up to the Bering Strait. Once again, just like at the South Pole, he encounters all of this ice that is up there. And he starts to make foraging. He travels further north than anyone has ever traveled, all the way up to the 70-degree mark, past the Arctic Circle. He comes in again. They see these. They call them sea cows. First time Europeans had ever seen walrus. That's the first drawing of them. They'd shoot them. They hated the way they tasted, but they needed food. Here, they found this creature, a sea otter. That's the very first drawing of a sea otter that was brought back to England as well. They encountered these creatures. They encountered this. They called it the white bear. Those were polar bears. That's the very first drawing of a polar bear encountered. And of course, he headed over. He decided he didn't need to do this, but he made a push up. And the ice, he's going and he's thinking, okay, we might be pretty good here. And so he's traveling, and then all of a sudden he sees this fog coming up off the water, and he knows that that is just solid ice, and he comes back, he's going back and forth. Finally, he ends his journey. He decides, I need to come back, it's getting late in the season. And he's looking and he sees Russia. He sees Kamchatka over there. And he says, you know what, I'm just going to do this for the heck of it. And he does. And he goes over to Russia, onto the Asian continent, and he meets these people, encounters them, and he only spends one day there, and he heads off. And now he has to figure out what he's going to do for the winter. And he had to make a decision, because as we said, one of Cook's qualities is he is persistent. right? You think he's going to give up after one try? No, because he felt like they would make him come back again. And he said, okay, what are we going to do? We got two choices. We can hang out up here and freeze our butts off, or we can sail back to paradise. So what does he do? He doesn't put it to a boat, but if he had, I guarantee you, nobody wants to stay up there. So he sails back down to Hawaii. And he comes back and he hits Maui between, right around the Maui area between Maui and the Big Island. You've got Maui, Molokai, and you've got the Big Island of Hawaii. And he's sailing around there. He's trading with the Hawaiians that live on Maui. He's doing a little bit of trade. And everybody's going, his crew is going, okay, let's go. Let's land. We're here. But Cook says, no, we're not going to do that yet. And one of the main reasons he did that was because he didn't want his crew engaging with the Hawaiian women. Because they were carrying, at that time they were carrying different sexually transmitted diseases and so forth. And so he was very strict about that. And he just didn't want to let these guys go like that. And so he's sailing for weeks. But imagine this, these guys have not even touched land for months. And where have they been for the last 4 months? They've been up in the Arctic. My goodness, freezing. And so he's traveling, doing trade with them, but that's kind of it, doing his best. And he does this for 6 weeks. I'm surprised there wasn't a mutiny on the Bounty just for that. Well, anyway, he finally decides that they're going to land in Kalakakua Bay. And how many people have been there, by the way? If you've been to Hawaii, you may have been to this bay. And I'll show you the very first map drawn of this by the cartographer. But he doesn't do it before he's been sailing around the Big Island of Hawaii. And he's been sailing around it in a very particular direction, a clockwise direction. And finally, this is Kalakakua Bay, the drawing when Cook was there. And there's a huge celebration. And there are about 10,000 Hawaiians that are at this celebration. And then the big temple happens to be at Kalakakua Bay. It's right across the way. Here, it's called the Makahiki. And the Makahiki celebrates the mark of the new year, or the agricultural season. And it honors the god Lono. And Lono is a big god. It's god of agriculture, rain, health, prosperity, anything good in life. This is Lono. So, there he's here at the Makahiki, November to February, honors Lono. Cook has fulfilled this Hawaiian legend that Lono would return. And that Lono would return in a giant sailing ship. And you might think, oh, well, sailing, they only had canoes. But no, all of the Hawaiians, all of the Polynesians, they were used to seeing sails. All of their vessels had sails. They could carry 5 or 6 people, or some of their vessels were so big they could carry 500 people on these sailing canoes. So they were used to this. They were expecting it, maybe not exactly in that shape. Cook is revered. He is thought to be a king because he's the captain of the ship, and for the next 3 weeks they enjoy all this hospitality gifts. Cook is given one of these cloaks, and these cloaks are only reserved for the chiefs, the highest of the chiefs. That cloak that was given to Cook is now in the Bishop Museum in Honolulu, and if you want to see it, you can go to that museum while we're there, and you can see the cloak that was given to Cook. And I'll tell the story of that tomorrow. But anyway, he's here. Death becomes a problem. Their welcome is pretty much over, and they decide to leave. So Cook leaves with the Discovery, and the wind breaks the Resolution's foremast, and they have to return back after 5 or 6 days. And during this time, the tender is stolen. And the tender is like our life rafts, right? Our little tender boats. And Cook has one main one. And Cook flies into a rage because of this. And he decides that he is going to get that tender back. And the reason he flies into a rage is because his plan is to go back up again, right? And he cannot do what he needs to do in terms of mapping and finding the Northwest Passage unless he has that tender. So he is already having anger management problems, right? And he has a plot. He's going to kidnap the king, bring him onto his ship, and then hold him for ransom to get this tender back. Not a good idea. Not when you've got 10,000 Hawaiians that are already angry about them and already now suspecting Lono would never have come back. Lono's foremast would never have broken. So now they're even questioning him. He gets into a fight and Cook gets killed, along with several others. They return parts of his body. The custom in Hawaii is that the power is in the bones, and so they return back like a forelimb, they return a thigh bone, and they return Cook's head. And the crew is going, what the heck? That's not Christian custom, but it was different. This is how the Hawaiians did it. Eventually, they get the rest of Cook's remains, they bury him at sea, and now Clark has to decide what to do, and the crew does. And they decide that they are going to fulfill Cook's wishes to go up to the north. And this is the very first map ever drawn of Hawaii. And you can see the spelling, Hawaii. This is Kalikakua Bay, and you see two anchors there. If you ever go back there, you can look there and you can see where his ship's anchored. His monument sits right here, and this is the whole bay. But once again, these ships are shut out by ice. Clark continues. He dies. It turned out he had tuberculosis. He knew he had it, and that was where he ended up dying. He took over for Cook. Ended up in Macau as well. They round the Cape of Good Hope, and they ended up back in Plymouth. And they prove beyond a doubt that there is no Northwest Passage, and they lay that to rest. His legacy included this, his ships. He had the Endeavor, that was on his first voyage. The Endeavor now we think is wrecked off of Rhode Island. Yeah, and you can watch the news. They're going to go check that out. Could be there. It's possible that his ship, the Resolution, on the very last voyage is also located right next to the Endeavor off of Rhode Island. The Adventure, we don't know what happened to that ship, and the Discovery was broken up in Chatham, and those ships are gone. But that would be cool to come up with the Endeavor. As far as his wife, he had a wife, he had 6 children. None of his children survived. They also have no descendants. They didn't live long enough to reproduce. There are no descendants. And for reasons we do not know, Elizabeth destroyed all of the personal correspondence that she had with her husband. I think she considered that correspondence sacred. She didn't want that out, that personal information out. We know very little about Captain Cook's personal life because of that, because there is no record of it. She got book royalties, and Cook, before he left on that last voyage, arranged a pension for her so that she was taken care of, and she lived for another 56 years after Cook's death. Cook had 3 publications for each one of his voyages. He wrote over 1 million words, and I added one little piece because I thought it was very interesting. Cook was not only respected by the Europeans, but he was also respected by the Americans, and one person in particular, Benjamin Franklin. And of course the war had started, and Cook was going to be traveling through waters that the Americans would be looking for British ships. Benjamin Franklin so respected Cook that he ordered American ships on no account to attack Cook's ship on his 3rd expedition. So Cook was given free passage through all of those waters during the wartime. For that, they ended up, well, after the war, after the American War ended up, those ships just kept moving back and forth, and that was where they ended up. Yeah, it's hard to really trace the legacy. The question was, how did his ship end up there? His contributions to science included accurately measuring longitude, Northwest Passage not existent, Southern Continent did not exist, discovery of the Hawaiian Islands, and then I just added this Never Lost a Man discovery because that was so significant during that time. There are 24 monuments, 36 places that bear his name. There's the monument at Kalikakua, and every now and then you'll see some red paint that has been thrown on these monuments, and that's because some of the indigenous groups feel that his legacy is one of colonialism rather than Unlike other explorers who sailed for gold, conversions, and empire, Cook was driven by his passion for discovery. He's respected by his countrymen and beloved by crew for his courage and skills as a navigator and explorer. His obsession with accuracy and precision meant that his discoveries and maps could be trusted beyond a shadow of a doubt. And finally, he was the first explorer of his time and respected and was genuinely curious about the inhabitants that he encountered. This is the book I used, one of my sources for learning about Cook. It's what inspired me to put a show together about him, The Wide, Wide Sea. And here are some shows that I've got coming up. Tomorrow we're going to do Navigators of the Pacific. We're going to talk about Explorers of the Trench. I've got a couple of shows on Hawaii for you. One where I will tell you about how to get around Honolulu. And then I've got a few more just about the creation of the islands, some of the life that's around them. And then one show on how animals think as well. All right, folks, that's all I've got for you. Thanks for coming and hanging out with me. And we'll see you tomorrow.